The next item on our agenda is review of security and safety strategies and procedures related to April 21st school bus event on bus 138. And it's the board's intention to have as much of this discussion as possible in public and only going into executive session when we need to review safety and security protocol. But the general discussion, as much as we can, we will be having in open session.
So thank you all. We have Ryan Feely and Lori Rhodes with us tonight to kind of give you an update. We also have Amy Lavosi as our attorney. We do know that in these situations, there are confidentiality things that we can't speak about. And so Amy is really here to stop us if we are going too far. And if we then need to go into executive session, we will. But we want to make sure that we are making sure that we don't step over any lines tonight. So we are going to start with Mr. Feely is going to take us through what occurred that we can share that afternoon, and then anything that needs to be filled in from the school's point of view. We have Dr. Rhodes here who will give us some information as it relates to what the school has seen. So Ryan, I'll turn it over to you at this time.
Okay, good evening, everyone. As Dr. Lucero said, I'm here to provide an overview of the situation that occurred on bus 138 last Friday, April 21st. Just to repeat a little bit of what Dr. Lucero just said a moment ago, a full review would include issues of student privacy, which is protected under the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, FERPA, which prohibits public disclosure of any information that could lead to the identification of a student. A full review would also touch on safety and security protocols and strategies, which are generally not discussed in open session. So given these considerations, I ask that the board understand that there may be some questions that we cannot answer with specifics in this forum. But what I can share is the following. On the afternoon of Friday, April 21st, an incident occurred on Scofield Magnet bus number 138. The incident occurred after school at approximately 3:15 p.m. as the bus was bringing the students home. A group of students on the bus was acting in a manner inconsistent with the district's expectations and policy with regards to behavior. The driver repeatedly tried to quell this behavior. He was unsuccessful and the behavior escalated. When the bus driver determined that the safe operation of the bus was not possible under those circumstances, he pulled over and he called First Student Dispatch for direction. After several attempts to calm the student behavior and continued discussion with dispatch, First Student Dispatch ultimately directed him to park the bus in a safe location and await the arrival of the police. I understand that during this period, several students may have called their parents who went to the location the bus was parked at in order to retrieve the students. When the police arrived, the responding officer spoke with the driver, spoke with First Student Dispatch, and then facilitated the release of the students to their parents if their parents were on site after confirming the identification of each parent. The remaining students were dispatched to a second bus, which arrived behind bus 138 shortly thereafter, and the responding officer remained on the scene to ensure that the students were placed on that second bus. And that second bus then delivered the remaining students home safely. So that was Friday, April 21st. On Monday morning, April 24th, Scofield building administrators and the SPS transportation department requested, received, and reviewed the first student bus security camera footage. From the video, Principal Clayton and his staff were able to identify the students involved in the disturbance, and Principal Clayton also interviewed other students on the bus, including those who witnessed but did not participate in the disruptive behavior. The students involved and their parents or guardians were notified of any disciplinary action and consequences that would be enforced. And the consequences would vary based on each student's level of engagement in the disruptive behavior. As you're aware, students who display behaviors inconsistent with Board of Ed policy or their school student handbook may be issued consequences, which can include, but are not limited to, suspension from the bus, suspension from school, expulsion, or referral to law enforcement. Since the incidents, the transportation department has had several discussions with first student regarding the incident and will continue to work with the bus company to ensure that the company, all of its drivers, and Stamford Public Schools understand the safety and security protocol and strategies that are in place when these situations arise. First student confirmed that they will provide additional training specifically to the driver of bus 138, but they will also address the issue of safety, particularly with regarding student behavior, with all of their drivers at a safety training meeting. We recognize this was an upsetting situation for the students caught in the bus who were not involved particularly, and their families. And we are working to ensure that within our power, similar situations do not occur in the future. So I hope that was a sufficient general overview. And again, I'll try to answer whatever questions may be appropriate.
Questions? Mr. George?
Yeah, I'm not sure you can speak to this. I guess I just, and anecdotally, I suppose, hearing from some of the parents, I think, had indicated there had been problems with this bus. In other words, the Friday incident was a culmination or was an incident, but there have been other minor incidents on the bus, and kind of hearing that also from this from citizens. So I guess just sort of left feeling like, okay, was there generally a problem with this? Because hearing about bus monitors on the bus, but I don't know that to be the case. So I don't know if there's anything you can address as to the history or what has happened on that particular bus route, or whether that'll take more investigation.
I think, can I speak?
Of course.
Thanks, just I'll help. I think that I'm comfortable letting you know that I'm aware of, from what we did to look into this, of a second incident where student behavior wasn't what was expected. I think that was back in February, and it was handled by the school. The administration took a look at it, issued appropriate consequences. But I'm not aware of any other incidents.
Thank you. Currently, what is the, or is there a policy or protocol in regards to the police being notified when a bus is stopped? Specifically in regards to communicating with the parents?
I would say let's talk about security, strategy, and protocol in executive session. I don't want any information we talk about today to allow the bad guys out there to figure out how to get our buses pulled to the side of the road or anything else. So we can't answer that question, but I would respectfully ask that we do so in executive session.
I'm sorry, can you clarify? If I'm asking if a bus is pulled over and the police are notified in regards to communicating with parents specifically, is there a policy currently that explains that?
Parents policy.
Yeah, communicating specific. So if my child is on a bus gets pulled over, and police are brought into it. Currently, do we have a policy in place that says notify parents via text, phone, email, in regards to this? Does that currently exist?
So I want to be clear, a policy would have been adopted by the board. Are you saying a procedure that isn't currently in place? Okay.
So I think the best way to answer that is, in general, the procedure is for schools to do what they can to notify parents whenever there's an incident on a bus, whether that's a delay due to traffic, weather, breakdown, or something more serious. That is what we would want to have happen.
So you're saying there is a procedure in place? And again, maybe if I give the example, my child is on the bus. My child, let's just say this was an elementary school. My first grader is not going to be able to pick up the phone and explain exactly what's going on. In their eyes, they see the police outside, they make it home. At the dinner table, I say, what happened? Oh, the police came to our bus today. Is that the first time I'm going to hear that the police came and my daughter had this interaction on the bus? Is there something in currently that we do that would have notified a parent that this happened on the bus for their child, with their child?
I don't know that we have a specific procedure in place regarding police action. That's specific.
So you're saying something exists if the bus stops? Flat tire on the bus.
I'm saying that the notifications that would go out as a matter of course would relate to the delay in the child arriving home.
So that exists. That procedure exists currently. Okay, so in this instance, with the bus having been pulled over, if the parents on this bus, how would they have been notified that this happened, that the police came in and all of this transpired? How would they have been notified? And again, were they what happened as of today?
I don't know that I can speak to all of that in the notifications in this incident. What would normally happen is that the school would send out a message through Remind or School Messenger or one of the various channels to alert parents that the bus was delayed or that some other incident had occurred, not specifically related to the police action.
So when parents came on last week and spoke, they said that they, to that point, to speaking in front of the board, they hadn't heard any official communication as to what had happened on the bus. Can you speak to that? Is it just a remind message was not sent to the parents in that regard?
Well, I don't know if a remind message was sent about the bus being delayed due to it being pulled over. And I can't speak to the larger communication, which I think is what you're referring to, about the parents wanting to know what happened. That is probably not something that would go out in a remind. That's something that would probably go out in a different messaging portal or email from the principal at a later date.
And my understanding is neither one happened in this situation.
So I think in Mr. Shree's example too, in your example, is your daughter one of the perpetrators? Is your daughter one of the perpetrators of what happened, or is she an observer?
Observer.
Because it matters in that, because the perpetrators, or, we're talking a hypothetical instance, right? Those parents would be notified as there was disciplinary action that was taken. But any time in a school because the school bus is the extension of the school, if something is happening disciplinary like that way, it doesn't get sent out to the entire school community. Does that make sense?
But even in this regard, we're specifically talking about the families of bus 138.
Right.
So in that regards, the observing child, their parent would want to know what happened. And I think that is the concern of many of the parents that came to speak, saying that to the day they didn't know exactly what happened. So because my child wasn't one of the perpetrators, our family would not then be privy to any information in regards to what happened that day on the bus. I mean, I think, do you understand where I'm going with this?
And I do believe, but I would have to check on it, that there was something in the parent newsletter. So again, it's kind of that general statement that about the bus and the bus behavior, but it wouldn't go specifically if the students weren't involved in it. Just like if something happened in a classroom or in a cafeteria, there wouldn't be a message sent out to all of the families.
I'll let somebody else ask a question because I'll get back to it.
Yourself.
So I have a question about the protocol, which is kind of building off of that question. And then one about just like how we handle student behavior. So for the protocol question, so one, I will say I am a Scofield parent. So I did see in the newsletter, and it's very general, right? So it's kind of like, hey, parents, remind your kids to behave on the bus because the police have to be called, right? I don't mean to speak for you, Prince, but for my perspective, the presence of police can be very traumatic for many people. And I think we should have even if that's not our process right now, I think we should tell parents that your kid went to a different location than they were supposed to, and the police were called. And that might have been very scary for students. And so even if they were the students, sometimes it's the students who are not the perpetrators or whatever, like sometimes it's the kids who had nothing to do with what was happening that it can be the scariest for. So if we don't have something like that in place, I wonder if it, as a matter of course, that if my kid is interacting with the police at some point during their day, especially for bad reasons, that like, I think that parents should know that. So that's just one thing. But in hearing about the bus drivers being retrained, I want to acknowledge that, like, and it kind of blows my mind sometimes in schools that we put all these kids on a moving vehicle, and we would never put them unsupervised in a school building. And that's not Stamford Public Schools. That's every school district. Of when would you ever have 50, however, you'd never put them in a room with someone who's not really watching them, right? So I want to acknowledge that buses generally just, it's not a great situation for safety. And that's the system that we have. But when you say the bus driver is being retrained, I guess from our perspective as a district, like what would we have wanted? That what's implicit in that is the bus driver should have actually done something different. And so what should the bus driver have done?
Is that something I can?
I would be more comfortable talking about that in executive session.
That's fine. So then the other question I have, which maybe is also for executive session, is for the student behavior piece, because we've heard a lot about the sort of the actions of the bus driver, but we've also heard about student behavior is actually quite dangerous as well, from what I've heard. Things being thrown out of the bus, students opening the emergency exit for the bus and running out of the bus, causing danger. And again, very scary for kids who are not doing any of this on the bus to be on a moving vehicle where kids are throwing things out the window or potentially causing accidents. And I just wonder, I know that you can't talk about the individual consequences for students, but this is also, I would imagine that each of those students needs an individual plan, an individual safety plan or disciplinary plan in order to be able to ride the bus. And from my understanding, like there's a set of students who've had repeated behavior issues on this bus. And I know suspending kids from a bus is not ideal, then they don't go to school. It also suspensions don't necessarily solve the problem, but it feels like there might need to be an out-of-the-box solution for these individual students who are causing a really dangerous situation. And so I just wonder if that's something that is being explored at the school or something that's being planned for by the principal with individual plans, agreements that if your child is going to be on this bus, that there's a safety plan. Maybe these are kids who have special, like, I don't know what their specific behavior reasons are, but clearly they need to be doing something different on the bus. It's not typical that a 7th or 8th grader or 6th grader is throwing things out of a bus window. So those to me seem like kids who might need something different in their transportation plan. So I just wonder, like, is that something that happens for kids?
I think we can say in general, when things like this happen, the principal does work with the parents to determine what the best supports that could be put in place to not have the action repeated is our ultimate goal. And so we can talk about that generally. That's what would happen.
Just from my understanding, the last thing I'll say is, like, my understanding from the parents that we've heard from, this is an ongoing issue on this bus. And again, as a Scofield parent, I've seen this in the newsletter several times that this is an ongoing issue on this bus. And so it seems like a time to take an out of the box kind of approach with that bus, whether it's bringing all the parents in, whether it's individual plans, like whatever they've been doing, it doesn't seem to be working. And the idea of kids running off a bus away from the police is terrifying. What if someone had gotten hit by a car? I mean, there's so many different things that could have happened that, it's like maybe our typical disciplinary actions are not working here.
So anytime there's any kind of suspension from school or from the bus. And my understanding is that there's a reentry plan and that they generally do revolve around safety plans, but I will work with Scofield administration to ensure and talk more about what that looks like. I don't have the details on that, but my understanding is any kind of suspension, again, like if it's an out of school suspension or a bus suspension, that there's a reentry plan, but I can check on that.
Dr. Hannah?
Thank you. I'm gonna look at this from a variety of angles. First one, Board of Ed. I don't like surprises like this. And I know in the policy, Dr. Lucero and I were talking about this earlier. I really would like to relook at something where we do have reports from the bus, the administrator, not the principal, but the administrator in charge of those, so that we kind of know what's happening month by month. My personal opinion, it was in the policy, but Dr. Lucero and I were talking, it had been taken out, but it was for specific reasons because CAVE didn't have it in it. But I know other districts use both Mooney and CAVE to kind of draw conclusions. And so my one recommendation is that we look at that again. And as a Board of Ed, have monthly reports about buses. I don't like surprises. This was kind of embarrassing because I think we can do better. My second one is systemic leadership issue. Who is the 092 in charge of buses for middle schools? Certification is 092, administrator certification. Is there an 092 person, regardless school? Because this isn't the first time we've heard about bus issues. I was very concerned. And so who's the 092? Ryan, you don't have the 092. Who's the 092 in charge of middle schools for buses? Or is there no leadership involved there? I know it's specific by schools, but if we're going to look at how this is handled, because I know we've had other issues in other schools. I get the calls. It sounds like it's been taken care of. Who is the person, the administrator in charge of buses for middle schools or for high schools or for elementary? Is there someone in charge?
So you have a principal who has a 092.
Okay.
You have an associate superintendent that has a 092, if that's what you mean.
Right.
So each of the associate superintendents have about 7 buildings that they supervise, and the principal supervises their building.
Right. And my recommendation, again, systemic leadership, is do we need to consider whether it's under a board policy that, the 092 person, because Ryan, I thought was in charge of buses, and then I'm going, he doesn't have an 092. So if it is by school, it's by school. I'm just checking on that, but maybe we need to systemically look at that it's by middle school or high school or elementary, and it's communicated maybe at least between the associate and the principals. So, because the problem was parents didn't get communicated with other than in a newsletter. That I've been in other districts where a letter goes out to 138 saying, this is what happened. And here's, and you don't go through the follow through, but maybe another idea to consider, because it didn't look good. It didn't look good. And as a parent, if I had a child on there who was being good, because number one, safety should be our issue. And as a parent, I would be livid if my child has to be on a bus with kids like that are allowed to continue. So I would like to systemically look at that, how we do that, because I would expel those students. That would be the consequence, because it's not just the student, it's also the parent. Let me help you out here. I understand some of these kids and they're maybe having a bad day. But if this is a continued pattern, where is that coming from? And so I would be concerned about some of the parenting piece on this, is that there's some coaching from the sidelines for that parent and child or group of parents and children, because evidently.
This is going to go off in 4 seconds.
Oh, yeah. There was an issue here and it was an ongoing issue. So those are 3 things. Board of Ed, that we would get monthly notes, systemic, how it's handled by maybe grade level, And then how are we working on communicating? Because that's the piece that I don't think it's fair to necessarily all these principals. If there's different policies in place, this kid gets 3 days, this kid gets 1 day, and then we're not uniform across the district. Sometimes there's such a thing as expulsion off the bus. Ouch, because it might help that parent understand too.
I'm sorry, excuse me, can you guys hear me?
Much rather get a text message or email to say an incident
Thanks,
happened.
Fritz.
We don't have the details and 911 is called. I don't think it's odd in Stamford to have children run away from police. I think that is more common, but I think that goes to building relationships. And I think that we as a board and hopefully through the superintendent can look at the MOA on how it is we can notify the families that were in that incident. And again, not all the details because I understand the privacy, but I think the trigger for some parents and even myself is to know that 911 is called. But as Fritz gave an example, he would hear it from his kindergartner, not the school. So I think that we have to take a lead in that. And I know years ago with 2 previous superintendents, they used to, I don't remember the all clear in elementary, principals used to wait to the buses. That was something they did. I think it was under Winnie, a couple superintendents. They used to have an all clear that the principals were not leaving until all those buses were gone. And it was like an all clear, kids are home safe. So I don't know. I know this was a middle school level, but something to the route that parents are notified when 911 and the police are involved, because as a parent, I find it disheartening. Like I want to know. So I would love to go that route. And I would love for the Stamford Police Department to work with us as a board to develop that procedure, but also to build relationships with the students when they're called on for 911 issues of throwing things out, buses and misbehaving. I would like to remind everybody on this board that we are supposed to be restorative. So I think that a safety plan, a return to suspension plan, I don't want to see it written down. Like I want to make sure with fidelity that those things are done for those students. Because I would hate to expel a student over a bus issue. So I think those are my thoughts. And I think it goes to, again, communication is the biggest thing. I'm not upset to know that a bus driver pulled over because whatever was going on the bus and the kids were misbehaving. What I'm upset is as a board member and a parent is to know that the incident happened and the parents weren't notified. Like even as a board member, we sometimes do it. I know, for an example, didn't regard to 911, but something happened at Hart and Lori sent the board an email. Just those kind of emails to say, hey, this happened. Not all the details because it happened on a Friday. Monday, they had to figure it out. And Tuesday was the board meeting. But just a heads up to say, hey, this has happened. And I think that that would help the parents and community and the kids to know that, okay, everything's okay. We had an interaction with the police department and the cops, but we're okay and we're going to move on. So those are my thoughts about everything.
Yes.
And my only suggestion would be, since you were talking about retraining the bus drivers, maybe having an assembly at the school for the children on what acceptable behavior, and it's a privilege to ride the bus, because my understanding is Scofield has a document that you have to sign, a code of conduct, but how many kids really read that? They sign it, they turn it in, it's logged in. So maybe going into all of the schools, because I'm sure it's not just happening at Scofield. I'm sure it's other schools as well, because it's a time where it's almost like a free period. They're running around, they're chucking things at each other. So going over what's acceptable on a school bus might be really helpful for these kids. That's my only comment.
Yeah, I just want to add my voice to agree with Ms. BOE. I think that when police are involved, it rises to a different level, whether it's at school or on the bus. But I also, as serious as this issue was, I think we have to put it into perspective and realize that we have thousands of bus routes. And rarely does something like this happen. When it does, we have to make sure that parents are aware. So I think that at the minimum, somebody should have gotten, a parent should have gotten an email or a text or something that evening or soon after they could do it. The principal is responsible for those children until they get off the bus. And so when that situation was cleared, Mr. Clayton should have known about it. And at that point, he could have sent an email to parents to say there was a issue on your child's bus. It's being looked into. Safety is our prime concern in there, so that when a child comes home and says to their parent, there was a policeman on my bus today, it's not going to be, oh my God, what happened? And are you okay? So my other question is about the monitor. Can we address that now or in executive session?
We can start. Sure.
Well, and Mr. Clayton had sent an email to parents and let them know that there was going to be a bus monitor on this bus till the end of the year. The monitor, from what I understand from an email we received, the monitor was there for a week, and then this week there is no monitor. So I think when we tell a parent that something's going to happen, we need to make sure we follow through on that. So
Yeah,
and
I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I don't need a monthly report on buses. I think that you guys have plenty to do. But when there are incidences that involve the police, then I think the board should be notified. It's my only, Mr. Sharif.
Kids have been throwing things off buses since kids have been riding on buses. I mean, I went to Scofield. I was driving all the way from North Stamford to the other side of Stamford, and a lot of things happen. So again, I'm not here to discuss that and what happens to those kids who throw things off the bus. I think it really comes back to communication, and I'm happy that the board has this opportunity to really talk about what expectations are. I think people reiterated clearly especially when police are involved. So it really isn't specific to just the bus. If police were called on site for any reason at a school and my child witnessed that, again, that's another opportunity for parents to be notified. I think this is really an example or really an opportunity to start to see some of those areas maybe we haven't created procedures on, because I have to sit there and think, if those parents didn't come and start talking about this issue, would I have known really what happened that day on the bus as a board member? And that's really concerning to me. So I'm hoping that after this conversation with the board, we can look at some of whatever we want to call it, gaps or areas that we didn't think we needed to. We can start thinking about other situations where parents would want to be notified, and then hopefully just put that into action. Because for me personally, this happens, a text message goes out to those parents that night, even if the text message said, an incident happened on the bus, more information will come, police were notified. Again, that's still a communication to parents, not everything. Similarly to the board, to even get something like that is better than, again, parents coming at a board meeting talking about something and we have to sit there and say, oh, what are they talking? And this has happened before on the bus. I mean, I'm not sure, but obviously including the police into that is a whole nother level. And then going a step further, if a police officer was called to like the cafeteria and God forbid somebody was arrested on site, again, I'm still, that's what I'm saying. It's not necessarily about the bus. It's how are we notifying parents and what are those areas that maybe we haven't seen and hopefully can get in front of so that the next time we are able to notify those parents. Because that's really the only thing I had concerns about is communication to parents. Thank you.
And I think, in Jackie Pioli's point, so we don't expel students, but the other thought, similar to the vaping marijuana preventive action group that we have at the police station, one of the thoughts is these individuals that are being cited for ongoing behavior and their parent must go to an educational session. That might be another creative way to help them understand, because what's going to happen, the behaviors haven't stopped with some of these individuals. Now we have a monitor, and I'm just thinking of the financial part. That monitor costs extra money. And so now we have to, again, it's like an extra babysitter on the bus. Is that fair to all the good kids? And that parent, along with their child, should probably show up at some type of educational session so we do not have that kind of pattern. It's not fair to all the good kids. And evidently there's something that was missed in their behavior. And I just think that that's a preventative approach that we could take with the police and the youth bureau to help those students and that parent, because evidently there was some other issues with some of these children. It's an ongoing pattern.
Yes. Ms. Gill.
So I'm just going to ask Dr. Lucero if you can brainstorm and maybe include Joe Kennedy to look at the MOA or somewhere in there that we could include like a contact process for if there's a 911 call at the school and how we can notify parents. And I would say that although I get why the monitor has to be on the bus, it is disappointing that at the school level, the children, family, and administrators could not come to an agreement of behavior, what is appropriate on the bus. Because these are not elementary school children, these are middle school children. So it is disappointing that a monitor has to be placed on a middle school bus. But I think that is not a board issue, it is not cabinet's issue. I think that is an administrative issue for that building to rectify and make sure that he can do a safety plan and a suspension re-entry plan for children to learn what's right and wrong. So.
Does the board feel the need to go into executive session? Have you gotten all the answers that you need? Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Pelosi, for being with us. Thank you,